Hey guys, I'm sure you've heard by now that chicken causes cancer. This is one of the recent headlines that will make you think twice before eating any of that lean, high-protein white meat. If you're familiar with the Daily Mail, they report sensationalist headlines like this all the time. Among their list of foods that can cause cancer are peanut butter, eggs, milk, red meat, rice, soup, tea, fish, chocolate, cheese, and bread. A less clickbait title would be that there's a link between the two, which is not the same thing. With a bit of maths, I'm going to show you what the true impact of these findings is and how concerned we should be. The researchers might be well-intentioned, but the media are looking for attention-grabbing headlines, and telling the 95% of the population that eat chicken that they might get cancer is a great way to do that. In general, the most important thing you need to know with cancer statistics is the difference between absolute and relative risk. I'll go over these quickly, and it should really help when you see headlines like this. Let's start with absolute risk. That is your percentage chance of being diagnosed with a type of cancer over a certain time period. So, for example, your absolute risk of being diagnosed with any type of cancer over your whole life is 50%. I've taken the UK's data for cancer diagnosis for men over a single year, and from that I can generate rough estimates for your chances of getting cancer in the next 12 months. So for every 100,000 men in the UK in 2016, 580 of them have a cancer diagnosis. The most common type was prostate, and outside the top 10 most common types, they are grouped into other cancers. The percentages here are your chances of each individual cancer in 1 year. So the average man's chance of getting prostate cancer in the next 12 months is 0.147%, and of any cancer, it's 0.58%. I converted them to odds, so all cancers in a given year is 1 in 173. Relative risk is the absolute risk of one population divided by the other. When I say population, I mean a group of people. So in the chicken study, it would be chicken eaters in one group and those who don't eat chicken in the other group. To get from the average risk to the absolute risks of each population, you need to know the relative risk and the percentage of the population in each group. Here's an example. Smoking makes you 8 times more likely to be diagnosed with lung cancer and twice as likely to get head and neck cancer compared to those who've never smoked. Those are your relative risks, 8 and 2. A relative risk of 1 means there's no difference between the two groups. You can't just multiply the average lung cancer risk by 8 because that number isn't non-smokers. It's a mixture of smokers and non-smokers. You need to know how many people smoke. I found an article that said 17% of UK men smoke. So we take the total male population in the UK, around 32.3 million, and split them into smokers and non-smokers. The overall risk was 0.077%. So if we multiply by the male population, we get 25,046 diagnoses. What we want is two numbers that add up to the total, and when you divide the smokers with lung cancer by all smokers, that number is 8 times bigger than the non-smokers with lung cancer divided by all non-smokers. If smoking had no effect, the numbers would look like this. But it doesn't, it has a big effect. In fact, 15,500 are smokers. You can then take those percentages and put them into separate absolute risk ratios, one for men who smoke and one for men who don't. All these numbers are just for illustration and not exact. Esophageal cancer's relative risk for smokers is 3.7, so we could put that in, while the average risk is 580 cases. For non-smokers that drops to 527, and for smokers that goes up to 833. So while you're 8 times more likely to get lung cancer if you smoke, your overall risk of cancer goes from 527 to 833, which is around 58%. Now that's established, let's move on to the chicken study. For every 210 grams of poultry a week, which is one large chicken breast, there was an 11% higher risk of prostate cancer, 20% chance of melanoma, and 26% risk of non-Hodgkin's lymphoma. 95% of the population eat chicken, so after the calculations, the absolute risk for eating chicken is the same as the average male. For those who don't eat chicken, the absolute risk of all cancers is 556 cases per 100,000, so an overall reduction by 4%. Depending on the cancer, other factors can influence your absolute risk. Let's look at 3 of these factors for prostate cancer: being male, over 50, and black. If you're watching this and you're a woman, then your chances of getting prostate cancer are much, much lower because you don't have one. So your absolute risk doesn't go up as much from chicken consumption compared to men. The blue line here indicates rates of prostate cancer per 100,000 over a 2-year period. And you can see that before the age of 40, there were no cases in the UK population. So again, absolute risk for the under 40s doesn't go up as much. Absolute risk for someone aged 65 would go up a lot. Around 3% of the UK population is black, and in one study their risk of prostate cancer was 3 times higher. As it's the most common cancer in men, that means a huge impact to the absolute risk, which looks something like this. When a study like this comes out, it's a good idea to get your detective hat on before you go changing your diet. Remember, the media are just trying to get your attention and don't have your best interests in mind, so try and go and read the actual research paper. If the article is quoting relative risk, find out the absolute risk of that disease. Prostate cancer is 63 times more common than anus cancer, so it would be worse if a food increases your risk of prostate cancer by 10% than if it increases your risk of anus cancer by 500%. Are you in a high risk category to begin with? If you're a 65-year-old man, then increasing your relative risk of prostate cancer is much more of a concern than if you're 25 or a woman. It might be that eating KFC every week isn't the same as having a plain boiled chicken breast with broccoli and rice. So within the group of chicken eaters, it could be there are subgroups that have different relative risks. How did they measure eating habits? The study was 5.7 years long on average, and they recorded meat intake based on a questionnaire at the start of the study. So if they changed their diet in the 5.7 years of the study, it would be less reliable. There's also the known problem with questionnaires. If I asked you to report your average weekly chicken intake over the last 3 months, would you be able to get it accurately to the nearest 210 grams? What do other studies say? Here's one from 2017 that reported a lack of association between eggs and poultry and risk of non-Hodgkin's lymphoma. You might not understand all the terminology, but reading beyond the article to the paper itself is a great way to become more informed and not fall for these clickbait headlines, which are increasingly common and often misleading. Thanks for watching.